She lives in the forest, they say, a woman older than time itself. Her house walks on chicken legs. Her fence is made of bones. Her eyes see through lies, and her name whispered in fear and fascination across Eastern Europe is Baba Yaga. But who is she really? The tale of Baba Yaga is one of the most enduring and misunderstood legends of Slavic folklore. To some, she is a witch. To others, a demon. And yet to those who listen more carefully, buried beneath centuries of folklore, fear, and Christian reinterpretation, lies the shadow of something far older, something sacred, something divine. This is not merely the story of a witch in the woods. This is the story of a goddess in exile. Long before the forests of Eastern Europe were carved into borders and kingdoms, there were stories passed from mouth to mouth around firelight and frost. Stories of a being who dwelled deep in the forest, beyond the reach of law or man. A being who did not ask for prayers but demanded respect. She was not gentle, but she was wise. She could kill, but she could also heal. She did not offer salvation, but she offered knowledge, transformation, even rebirth. Who was this woman really? Was she ever truly human? Or was she something else? Entirely something divine pushed into the margins as new gods arrived and old ones were buried. When we speak the name Baba Yaga today, we conjure images of an old crone, hunched and horrible, muttering spells and boiling children. But that image is not as ancient as we think. It is a mask placed upon something far older and more complex. To unmask Baba Yaga is to wander into the forest, not just the one outside, but the one within. The forest of myth, of collective memory, of cultural trauma and sacred forgetting. And it begins, as many tales do, with a question whispered by the fire. Who was she before they made her a monster? Across Slavic lands, Baba Yaga is a constant presence. In Russia, Poland, Ukraine, Belarus, the Czech Republic, her stories twist and shift like smoke. She gives riddles. She sets impossible tasks. She flies in a mortar and pestle. She abducts the foolish and tests the brave. She is chaos. She is death. She is the forest incarnate. But there's something strange about her. In many of these stories, Baba Yaga is not entirely evil. In fact, she often helps the hero if they can prove themselves worthy. She becomes a guide, a gatekeeper, even a protector. She is terrifying, yes, but also powerful, wise, and strangely fair. This duality, the destroyer, and the midwife, the devourer, and the teacher, is the first clue. Because in ancient myth, such duality often belongs not to witches but to goddesses. What happens when a goddess is forgotten? What becomes of her temple when it is chopped for firewood? Her statue repurposed for a Christian saint? Her rites branded as witchcraft? She survives, but she changes. She becomes a shadow of herself. She slips into folktales. She lives in stories told to frighten children. Her symbols become grotesque. Her powers become curses. Her temple becomes a hut on chicken legs. Her sacred grove becomes a haunted forest. Baba Yaga is what remains. She is the ghost of something once worshipped, now feared. And yet she has never truly left. In this series, we will peel back the layers of folklore, history, myth, and fear to uncover who Baba Yaga may have once been. We will look at her symbols, her functions, her possible connections to ancient Indo-European goddesses, to shamanic traditions, to the cycles of death and rebirth. We will ask why she survived when so many others were lost, and what her survival says about us. We will ask what happens to a culture when it forgets its goddesses, and what happens when those goddesses refuse to be forgotten. The forest still speaks her name. You only have to listen. To begin unmasking Baba Yaga, we must first understand the world that gave birth to her. Long before the written word, long before churches crowned the hills, and kings carved their names into maps, there was the forest. For the Slavic peoples, the forest was not just a place, it was a force, a sacred, untamed realm that was both feared and revered. It was where spirits dwelled, where the dead whispered, and where the oldest truth still lived, hidden among the roots and fog. In this world, stories were not entertainment. They were instruction, survival guides, oral scriptures. They carried warnings, encoded rituals, and preserved memories older then memory itself. And at the center of many of these stories stood a woman. Not just any woman, but a figure at once terrifying, and wise, monstrous, and maternal. She lived alone deep in the forest. She defied social norms. She knew things others did not. She was both outcast and oracle. She would become Baba Yaga, but she was not born with that name. The earliest echoes of Baba Yaga reach us not through a single story, but through patterns, recurring elements in Slavic oral traditions that point to a female figure with traits too consistent to be coincidence. A forest-dwelling woman with dominion over life and death. A keeper of thresholds. A challenger of heroes. A granter of wisdom if one dared to ask the right question and survive the answer. To reconstruct her origins, we must read between the lines of folktales. We must peer behind the curtain of Christian reinterpretation and patriarchal distortion. We must return to a time when female deities were not feared, but honored. Among Indo-European cultures, goddesses often embodied the cycles of nature, birth, decay, death, and renewal. They were midwives and mourners, warriors and weavers of fate. They existed beyond moral binaries. They did not demand worship as much as participation in seasonal rites, harvest ceremonies, and initiatory trials. Could Baba Yaga have once been such a goddess? Consider her home a hut perched on chicken legs. Absurd, grotesque, and yet utterly unique. In folktales, this hut spins, dances, turns away strangers. It does not simply shelter its tests. It protects sacred space. In many Indo-European traditions, the axis mundi, the cosmic pillar connecting worlds, is guarded by such surreal thresholds. The chicken-legged hut is a riddle, a symbol wrapped in absurdity to deter the unworthy. Consider her role as gatekeeper. In countless tales, Baba Yaga does not seek out travelers, they find her. And when they do, she tests them. With riddles, with impossible tasks, with choices that carry moral and spiritual weight. Sometimes she kills them, sometimes she helps them. But always she reveals something about them and about the world they live in. This is not a witch, this is an initiator. In shamanic traditions, particularly those of Siberia, and the steppes, female figures often serve as liminal guides. They dwell in the margins between life and death, known and unknown. They are feared but also sought after, not for comfort, but for transformation. Baba Yaga fits this role perfectly. She is the crone at the edge of the map, the embodiment of what we do not wish to see but must confront. She is the teacher we resist but desperately need. She is the force that strips us bare, that tests our worth, not out of malice but necessity. So how did such a figure become reviled? To answer that, we must look at what replaced her. With the spread of Christianity across Slavic lands, a new order was imposed, one that feared the forest, silenced women's knowledge, and recast feminine power as danger. Old goddesses were rebranded as witches. Their sacred spaces were defiled, their symbols mocked, their wisdom demonized, but not destroyed. Some survived, cloaked in folktales, disguised in riddles, whispered in lullabies. Baba Yaga, perhaps more than any other, endured. She adapted. She changed faces. But she never stopped being the one who waited in the forest. The one who held the key not just to the house, but to the self. The stories we tell about her reflect not just who she was, but who we became. As we journey deeper, we will uncover more of her ancient roots, myths, of the death goddess, the bone mother, the serpent queen. We will find echoes of her in far older traditions than we imagine. But for now, remember this. She is not only the forest witch, she is the memory of something we once called sacred. And she is still watching what lies beyond the threshold. In countless folktales, Baba Yaga is not merely a destination, but a test. She waits at the edge of the known world, her hut perched like a riddle on legs, her eyes gleaming with something ancient and unreadable. And those who find her never do so by accident. They are drawn by desperation, by destiny, or by some invisible thread that tugs at the soul. A lost daughter, seeking a vanished mother. A cursed prince seeking his fate. a foolish peasant seeking riches and instead finding ruin or revelation. The stories vary, but the structure endures a journey into the forest, a confrontation with the crone, and a transformation on the other side. This is the initiatory journey veiled in folklore. It is a pattern older than books, older perhaps than language. And at the heart of that pattern is Baba Yaga. She is the keeper of the liminal space, the borderland, between what was and what could be. She represents the moment of rupture, the sacred dismemberment, the necessary death before rebirth. In her cauldron boils not just bones and roots, but the raw materials of transformation. But the price is never cheap. In many tales, Baba Yaga offers help, but only if the seeker completes impossible tasks. Cleaning an endless room of ashes, milking stone cows, fetching fire from the skull-lit hut. Each task is symbolic, a ritual disguised as housework, a spiritual ordeal cloaked in mundane detail. These are not chores, they are thresholds. And what happens when the seeker fails? They are devoured. Quite literally. Baba Yaga in many tales consumes the foolish. Her hut creaks with the bones of the unworthy. Her fence is made of skulls with glowing eyes. And yet, even here there is meaning. In ancient myth, the devouring goddess is not always cruel. She is a force of purification, the eater of rot, the destroyer of illusion. To be consumed is to be unmade and perhaps made anew. Think of Kali in Hindu tradition or the Morrigan in Celtic lore. Think of Hecate at the crossroads. These are not villains. They are forces beyond good and evil. They are guardians of transformation. Baba Yaga belongs to this lineage. She terrifies, because she demands something few are willing to give: the shedding of the self, the surrender of ego, the acceptance of death not always physical, but symbolic, the death of certainty, of control, of comfort. And in return, she gives fire, fire the great purifier, the bringer of light and destruction alike. In many tales, Baba Yaga is the one who grants fire to the hero, but only after they have proven themselves worthy, only after they have passed through fear and into humility. It is no accident that her hut turns away those who do not speak the correct incantation, that her help must be earned, that her power cannot be stolen, only received. She is not a villain, she is a threshold. And thresholds are never safe. In the Slavic worldview, as in many ancient cultures, the forest is not just a physical space. It is the symbolic realm of transformation. It is where boys become men, girls become women, and the old ways are remembered or reimagined. To enter the forest is to risk being changed. To meet Baba Yaga is to guarantee it. So why has this sacred pattern been buried beneath fairy tale grotesquerie? Why do we tell our children only of the danger and not of the wisdom? Perhaps it is because transformation is frightening, because power in feminine form, unbound and unyielding, unsettles the structures we build. Because Baba Yaga cannot be controlled. She is not a queen, not a saint, not a virgin or a whore. She is something far older, a force. And forces once named can be remembered. They can also be awakened. In the next part, we will trace Baba Yaga's symbols, her hut, her mortar, and pestle her skull lanterns back to their mythic roots. We will uncover their meanings and ask what were they before they were made grotesque. But for now, remember, if you meet Baba Yaga on the road, do not expect a blessing. Expect a mirror. Before a name was a name, it was a symbol. And Baba Yaga, though called by many names, is most vividly remembered not by what she says, but by what surrounds her. Symbols cling to her like shadows, a house on chicken legs, a mortar and pestle, a fence of glowing skulls. To dismiss these as mere oddities is to miss the point. They are not grotesque flourishes. They are the remnants of sacred language, fragments of mythic code. Let us begin with the hut, a house that walks on chicken legs. Absurd, almost laughable until we ask what it means. In ancient cultures, the home was not merely shelter, it was cosmos. A microcosm of order within the wilderness of the unknown. To place a house on bird legs is to liberate it from fixed location. It becomes mobile, unrooted, wild. It is no longer a place of safety, but of challenge. But even more telling is the chicken itself. Across ancient Eurasian traditions, birds, especially hens, were associated with prophecy, fertility, and the boundary between life and death. In Slavic funerary rites, chickens were sometimes sacrificed at grave sites. Their scratching feet and keening calls were thought to bridge worlds. So when we say Baba Yaga's house stands on chicken legs, we are saying this is no ordinary home. It is a liminal place, a house between worlds. It moves because it guards a gate. Next, the mortar and pestle. In most fairy tales, witches fly on broomsticks. But Baba Yaga rides in a mortar, a deep bowl traditionally used for grinding herbs, and steers with a pestle, all while sweeping her tracks away with a broom. What a strange image. But consider this: the mortar is the vessel of transformation. In it, plants are crushed into medicine. Seeds are ground into food. It is a place of destruction, but also of healing. The pestle is the tool of will, the driver of change. And the broom, it conceals her path, reminding us that her power is not meant for the uninvited. This is not flight for escape. This is ritual flight, a shamanic journey. In many pre-Christian traditions, such objects were linked to female healers, midwives, and spirit walkers. Baba Yaga's flight is not away from the world, but above it. She travels the unseen currents between realms. She is not a passenger, she is a psychopomp. And then there is the skull. Ah, the skulls! Skulls line the fence of her home. Some glow, some scream, all stare. To the modern eye, they are signs of horror. To the ancient soul, they are signs of reverence. The skull is not just a remnant of death, it is a container of wisdom. In many cultures, the skull houses the soul after death. It becomes an object of power. In Slavic myth, skulls were not feared, they were honored. Ancestral skulls were kept in the home, spoken to, consulted. So Baba Yaga's fence is not just a warning, it is a gathering, a perimeter of guardians, a circle of ancestors watching, judging, protecting the sacred ground, and sometimes granting light, for it is from a skull that she gives fire. Think of the symbolism: a glowing skull passed to a worthy traveler, fire from the dead, illumination from those who came before. It is no simple gift, it is initiation. A torch passed from one who has walked the underworld. In her hands, even death becomes light. Taken together, these symbols tell a story that is far older than fairy tale. They speak of initiation, of thresholds of the sacred feminine in its most untamed form. But they have been distorted. Where once there was wisdom, now there is fright. Where once there was reverence, now ridicule. Her tools have become caricatures. Her home, a joke. Her skulls, a Halloween prop. Why? Because symbols are dangerous. They carry meaning too deep for simple systems. They defy control. And Baba Yaga's symbols, wild, feminine, shamanic, stand in direct opposition to patriarchal order. She cannot be tamed, and so she is vilified. Yet the symbols endure. They linger in stories, in children's drawings, in whispered dreams. They haunt us not because they are evil, but because we recognize them. Somewhere deep within, we know what they mean. We've seen them before in dreams, in rituals, in that strange moment of déjà vu when a fairy tale feels like memory. We remember. In the next part, we will follow the roots of Baba Yaga across continents and centuries to trace her lineage beyond the Slavic world and into the deep mythological web of Indo-European goddesses. But for now, let these symbols rest in your mind. Let them stir the memory you forgot you carried. To truly understand Baba Yaga, we must go beyond Slavic folklore. We must leave the snowy birch forests and travel back through time, through language, through myth. Because Baba Yaga is not only a Slavic creation, she is an echo of something ancient and widespread. A divine archetype whispered across cultures, etched into the bones of forgotten goddesses, and burned into the dreams of shamans and seers. In her traits, the crone, the devourer, the gatekeeper, we see glimpses of Indo-European goddesses who once ruled death and birth alike. Not just deities of nurturing, but of endings, of thresholds, of power that does not comfort but transforms. Let us begin with the three-faced goddess. In Indo-European cosmology, the goddess often appears in triple form: maiden, mother, crone. Each phase representing a stage in life, a season in the earth, a facet of the feminine divine. Baba Yaga is the crone. But not merely old. She is wisdom embodied, decay and clarity entwined. The one who has seen too much to pretend, who no longer placates but reveals. She is the winter of the soul, barren, beautiful, brutally honest. Her cousins are many. In Greece, there is Hecate, goddess of witchcraft, and Crossroads, guardian of the liminal. Like Baba Yaga, she grants passage, but only to those who dare ask. In Ireland, there is the Morrigan war goddess, shapeshifter, raven-cloaked specter of fate. She chooses who dies. She whispers truths you may not survive. In India, there is Kali, the Black Mother, whose tongue drips with blood, whose dance ends time. She is destruction, but also liberation. And in ancient Anatolia, there was Cybele, the wild mother flanked by lions, her rites echoing with drums and ecstasy. She too dwelled beyond cities. She too demanded transformation. These are not kind goddesses. They are necessary goddesses, and like Baba Yaga, they were misunderstood, especially as patriarchal systems spread. Their wildness became wickedness, their strength sin, their independence heresy. But beneath the demonization, their symbols endure. We see it in Baba Yaga's bone throne and Kali's garland of skulls. We hear it in her riddles, in the cryptic speech of Hecate's oracles. We feel it in her fire, in the dance of every goddess who burns through illusion. Even the serpent so often feared is hers. In Slavic folklore, Baba Yaga is sometimes linked to serpent imagery, her long limbs coiling her voice, hissing her knowledge serpentine. The serpent is not evil. It is wisdom, renewal, shedding skin, rebirth. She is a goddess of cycles, and that is why she survives. Because unlike gods of empire and order, Baba Yaga cannot be confined to temple or text. She is not codified, she is alive. She shifts, she hides, she adapts, and in doing so she outlives. She has no dogma, only experience. You don't worship her, you endure her. Or perhaps if you are brave enough, you become her. And that too is part of the archetype. Because Baba Yaga does not merely stand apart. She invites transformation. Her power is not meant to dominate but to awaken. Like the crone of every myth, she does not give answers. She hands you a skull full of fire and waits to see what you'll do with it. That is why she terrifies us. Not because she is evil, but because she sees through us. In the next part, we will explore how Baba Yaga's myth persisted through centuries of suppression, how oral traditions, children's stories, and folk rituals kept her alive when temples fell and empires burned. But for now, know this. Baba Yaga is not one story. She is every threshold ever crossed, every fear ever faced, every goddess we tried to forget but who never forgot us. What survives 1,000 years of erasure? Stone crumbles, temples fall, statues are shattered, and names are rewritten. But stories linger, especially the ones whispered. Baba Yaga did not survive through scripture or sanctuary. She was never crowned, never canonized. No empire claimed her, no priest defended her. And yet, she lives. Because she took refuge in the oldest place of all the tongue. When Christianization swept across the Slavic world, it came with fire and fear. The old gods were cast down, their festivals condemned, their symbols defaced. Where once there had been ritual, there was now silence. Where once there had been goddess, there was now devil. But not all traditions vanish under threat. Some adapt, some hide, some transform just enough to survive. Baba Yaga became part of the oral tradition, a figure of folklore, a monster in a tale, a warning to children, a plot device, a punchline. But always she remained, because the stories could not let her go. She would be recast again and again as a child eater, a forest witch, a wrinkled hag with iron teeth and a taste for mischief. And yet, even in these grotesque forms, her core endured. She was still powerful, still wise, still the one who knew the way through the forest. She may have lost her temples, but not her throne. It now stood in kitchens and hearths in the laps of grandmothers with story-laden voices. Her new altar was the bedtime tale. Her scripture was riddle and rhythm. Her rites were passed not by priesthood, but by the quiet continuity of women who remembered. Even when they could not speak her name, they told her story. A crone in the woods, a hut that walks, a test of courage, a fire hard won. These were the fragments worn smooth by generations. Fragments laced with humor, horror, and hidden memory. And they were enough. Enough to keep her alive. Because children listened, because women whispered, because something in us still needed her. In many rural communities, Baba Yaga became a household ghost, a figure simultaneously feared and respected. Peasant women would draw protective runes to ward her off, or leave tiny offerings in the woods to appease her. Her presence persisted in lullabies, in riddles, and the lingering sense that not all was lost. Even puppet shows told her tale, and in that theatrical grotesque she laughed, because she knew the truth. The more they tried to mock her, the more they repeated her name. The more they feared her, the more power she regained. She is a master of masks. She wears distortion like a cloak. She allows herself to be misunderstood because misunderstanding is another form of memory. Better to be misremembered than erased. And so while the gods of empire faded with their empires, Baba Yaga endured. Not untouched, not whole, but present. Transmitted not by decree, but by whisper. Passed not in temples, but in stories. And stories, unlike stone, do not break. They grow. In the next part, we will explore the psychological and symbolic role Baba Yaga plays today in fairy tales, in archetypal psychology, in the collective unconscious of modernity. We will ask, why does she still haunt us? But for now, look closely at the tales you've heard. Look closer at the monsters you feared as a child. Sometimes the monster is just the goddess in disguise, waiting for you to remember. Why does she still haunt us? We live in cities now. We light our homes with electricity, not fire. Our children no longer fear the forest. They fear the screen going dark. And yet, Baba Yaga remains, not in flesh, not even always in name, but in symbol, because she was never just a woman in the woods. She was always something more, a mirror, a metaphor, a threshold in the psyche. Carl Jung spoke of archetypes, primordial images buried in the collective unconscious, figures that return across cultures, across time, the hero, the mother, the trickster, the shadow. Baba Yaga is one of these. She is the crone, not simply the old woman, but the wise woman, the one who dwells at the edge of the map, who sees what others do not, who has walked through death and returned bearing knowledge wrapped in riddle. In Jungian psychology, the crone represents inner truth, often feared, often avoided, but necessary for growth. She appears in dreams and stories to challenge, to dismantle illusion, to demand transformation. She is the force that says, you must let go of who you were to become who you are. And Baba Yaga plays this role perfectly. She does not comfort, she tests. She does not answer, she reflects. She offers no false warmth, only fire. Think of how many fairy tales she inhabits not as enemy, but as trial. She sets the impossible task. She gives the object that saves. She appears just before the turning point. And always her presence marks change. She is the midwife of identity, not birthing the body, but birthing the self. Even in the West, her echoes are everywhere. In Disney's old hags, in the crooked witches of European lore, in the eerie blend of helper and horror, we see in characters like the fairy godmother, half benevolent, half terrifying. These are watered-down masks, but the source is the same. We fear her because she confronts us with things we do not want to see: our aging, our powerlessness, our shame, our potential. And yet we need her. Because in a world obsessed with youth, speed, and simplicity, Baba Yaga slows us down. She reminds us that not all paths are straight, that some knowledge must be earned through fire, that wisdom is not always gentle, and truth is not always kind. In therapy, the Crone archetype emerges when we are ready to shed layers, when we no longer wish to perform, but to know. She calls us inward, downward, through the dark forest of the soul. And at the center, the hut, still standing, still turning, waiting for the right words to be spoken. It's easy to dismiss her, to reduce her to a Halloween mask, a cartoon witch, a bedtime warning. But those images are hollow echoes. The real Baba Yaga waits beneath them, as she always has, watching from the margins. Because the psyche remembers what culture forgets. And when the time comes when you are ready to face what you've long avoided, she will appear, not to destroy you, but to demand that you change. In the next part, we will step fully into the present and examine how Baba Yaga is returning to cultural consciousness. In books, in films, in feminism, in shadow work. Why is she rising again? And what is she trying to tell us now? For now, remember, she is not a story from the past. She is the story you haven't finished living. You cannot kill what was never entirely alive. And Baba Yaga, who has never belonged to the world of flesh alone, is returning. Not as a goddess of temples or a feared monster in the woods, but as a symbol, a mirror, a force resurrected in ink, film, fire, and screen. In recent years, her presence has grown. Not in children's bedtime tales, but in literature, art, and spiritual discourse. Not in whisper, but in reclaiming. She is appearing in graphic novels and indie films, in feminist essays and academic journals, in podcasts exploring archetypes, in theater productions, in tattoos etched on the backs of those who carry the crone with pride. Why? Because something in us is remembering. In an age of noise, speed, and surface, Baba Yaga is deep, still, and strange. In a culture obsessed with light, she is shadow. Where modern icons offer affirmation, she offers confrontation. And we, some of us, are ready for that, especially women, because Baba Yaga was never just a figure of fear. She was a woman who refused to be tamed, who lived outside the village beyond the fence, who did not marry, did not serve, did not smile to please. She was old and powerful, and that made her dangerous. But now, in a world reckoning with its stories, that danger has become inspiration. Writers are reimagining her not as villain, but as voice. A voice for those dismissed as too old, too wild, too much. A figure who embodies autonomy, boundary, rage, and wisdom. In feminist readings, she becomes a symbol of the post-patriarchal, feminine, untamed, unpleasing, unknowable. Not a mother, not a maiden, not a lover. A being in her own right, her own rhythm, her own space. A woman who says you may come, but only if you come with truth. Artists reinterpret her as a goddess of the liminal, as a symbol of trauma survived, as a face of ancestral memory. Her chicken-legged hut becomes mobile sanctuary. Her skull lanterns become lights in the dark. Her cauldron becomes a crucible of healing. Even in pop culture, she slips through. In dark fantasy films and video games, in animated series and surreal novels. Her name appears sometimes altered, sometimes intact, but always with the echo. Because we crave what she represents. We crave thresholds, we crave wildness, we crave permission to not be palatable. And in psychological spaces, therapy, shadow work, dream interpretation, she re-emerges as the figure who guides us through our internal woods. Not to comfort, but to transform. Baba Yaga is no longer just a figure we fear. She is one we seek. When the world outside fails to offer answers, we go inward. And deep in that forest we find her, waiting, as she always has. Not smiling, not welcoming, but present and willing. She gives nothing for free. But if you bring your honesty, your wounds, your hunger, she will feed you. Not with sweetness, but with fire. And sometimes that is what saves us. In the next part, we will ask if Baba Yaga has survived, shifted, and returned. What now? What is her role in a future shaped by memory, myth, and meaning? And more importantly, what does she want from us? But for now, consider this. Not every resurrection is clean. Some goddesses return with dirt under their nails and smoke in their hair, and they do not come back to be worshipped. They come back to be heard. She has survived the past. She haunts the present. But what of the future? In a world spinning faster than it can comprehend, Baba Yaga lingers not as a relic, but as a reckoning. Not as nostalgia, but as necessity. Because something is missing. In our digital cities and algorithmic lives, we've streamlined everything. Comfort is instant. Knowledge is downloadable. Yet wisdom, that takes longer. And that is where she waits. Baba Yaga is the guardian of the forgotten. The ancient voice that reminds us progress without soul is just noise. In the silence beyond the screen, she calls. What does she offer us now? Not doctrine, not rules, but rhythm. The rhythm of nature. the rhythm of threshold and cycle. In her world, there is no straight line, only spiral. Growth, death, rest, return. She reminds us of the value of the wild, of intuition, of mystery. In an age that rejects aging, she reclaims the crone as sacred. In a culture that fears endings, she speaks of death without shame. In a system that prizes control, she whispers of surrender. And most of all, she reminds us that not everything should be known. Some truths must be earned. Some knowledge is not downloaded, but endured. What would it mean to listen to her again? Perhaps it means redefining power not as dominance, but as depth. Perhaps it means respecting limits not as weakness, but as wisdom. Perhaps it means remembering that the earth, like Baba Yaga, has boundaries, and we cross them at a cost. Her return is not gentle, it never was, but it is timely. We see her in eco-spirituality, in the slow rituals of forest bathing, ancestral healing, and dream work. We see her in movements to reclaim the feminine beyond aesthetics. We see her in the longing for stories that don't end in victory, but in understanding. She is not about winning. She is about becoming. And what does she demand of us? Stillness, honesty, the courage to sit in the dark without needing to fix it, the humility to approach wisdom with questions instead of answers. To remember her is to remember something older than language, the truth that we are not above nature, not beyond death, not outside the spiral. In a time where everything is quantified, she cannot be measured. In a world of constant exposure, she lives in shadow. In an era of optimization, she dares to be wild, broken whole. And so perhaps Baba Yaga is not returning. She never left. She simply waited for us to slow down enough to notice her footsteps in the moss, her breath in the fog, her story beneath our skin. In the final part, we will bring the journey full circle. We will look into the heart of Baba Yaga, not as monster, not even as goddess, but as mirror. Because if she is still here, what does that say about us? She was never meant to be understood, only remembered, only encountered, only felt in the bones. Baba Yaga is not a tale with a clear ending. She does not grant closure. She offers only reflection and asks what you will do with what you see. You began this journey with a question, who is Baba Yaga? But now that question must turn inward. Who are you in her presence? She has been called monster, witch, goddess, grandmother, exile. She has worn 1,000 names and 1,000 faces. But beneath them all, she is something older than language. She is the keeper of the liminal, the guide through the dark, the one who sees you when all your masks have fallen. And what does she see? She sees your fear, your hunger, your longing. She sees the part of you that craves transformation and the part that resists it. And in her eyes, there is no judgment, only fire. Because Baba Yaga does not punish, she tests. She does not seduce, she reveals. She does not destroy, she strips away. And beneath everything you are not, she waits for who you are becoming. If you followed her through forest and flame, through bones and riddles, through folklore and psyche, and back again, then you already know. She is not gone. She is not myth. She is the question that never stops asking. She is the path with no map. She is the silence in the story just before the end. And the story is not over. Because the forest still stands, and the hut still turns, and sometimes in the half-light between sleep and waking, you may feel her near. Not to harm, but to invite, to whisper, come, bring only what is true. And so you come, not to be saved, but to be changed, because she is not the one in the story. She is the story. And now it is yours to tell. So tell it well. Let the fire burn. Let the skulls glow. Let the old names rise from the soil. And above all, remember, the goddess never died. She simply walked into the woods and waited.